We had no show last Monday for Memorial Day. Connor O'Gara wasn't going to be on the show anyway because I think he had the day off. At least that's what he let me know. And he joins us right now on Halftime. Connor O'Gara, the senior national columnist at Saturday Down South. Give him a follow on the Twitter machine at CJ O'Gara. Writing baseball columns now about the SEC, trying to get its best ever baseball season. Connor, you watching the NCAA baseball tournament?
I can't say that I'm locked in the same way that you guys are. I definitely won't say that. Hearing that intro, I would not pretend to be a baseball expert like Joe Cox is at Saturday Down South. But, I mean, goodness gracious, with so much SEC involvement, this is potentially going to be a very memorable run for the SEC. I know it hasn't panned out necessarily for all those elite teams just yet, but, I mean, I think Sankey had some sort of comment about this potentially being like the best season SEC baseball has ever had. That was during the SEC championship. You could shed more light on that than I could, but I mean, there's nothing else going on this time of year, so I pretty much don't have a choice.
Yeah, I agree. Got a couple of SEC teams that have advanced to the Super Regionals, Vanderbilt and Tennessee, so the volunteer states can have a lot of baseball going on. Arkansas plays Nebraska later on in this one today. The one that's obviously very, very surprising is Florida being knocked out, going 0-2 in their own regional, got blown out by South Alabama in the second game. But, Connor, that wasn't even really the major story, I guess. One of the other aspects of that game was nobody goes to the Florida games, man. And they have a brand new ballpark, $65 million, a top-class baseball program that Kevin O'Sullivan has built, and yet the place was like a third full for the two games that Florida played. Connor, you live not too far from Gainesville. I've got family that lives there, and they are Gators fans. They are baseball fans, but they might be the only ones. I mean, it is a football school through and through, and that is the proof. I think they're going to lose O'Sullivan to LSU.
I mean, it's a football state. There's no doubt about it. And I don't know if I don't think you could blame it on the pandemic or say that has everything to do with it, because we know when Dan Mullen said this past fall, hey, let's pack the swamp, you know that there were 90,000 Florida fans who were ready to pack the swamp if given the opportunity. So it's weird to see those dynamics at play, because you could look at so many different places in the SEC, and whether it's Arkansas or Ole Miss or Tennessee, and you see some of these crowds, you're just like, oh my goodness, this is different than anything that I certainly grew up with in the Big Ten. I remember, Nebraska baseball, back when I was there a couple years ago, or not a couple years ago, but like 6-7 years ago, was a pretty big deal. But at the same time, it didn't have the same sort of fanfare that you see in the SEC. I grew up going to games, my brother's baseball games at Valparaiso, and those crowds were, I'll call them sparse, unless there was like a big-time prospect on board. But it's weird how that varies from state to state, and I don't know what Florida would need necessarily to get that shot of life into the baseball program, because I know they have fans, and I know they cover it, very, very well, but, it's just not a guarantee that you're going to get that same sort of fan support.
Connor, I wonder if you'd agree on this comparison, and I just started thinking about this the other day. Now, you and I are both from the North. You're Chicago. I'm from Pittsburgh. I grew up an NHL hockey fan. I did not watch college hockey, but there are definitely portions of this country, Big Ten country is part of it, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, the Northeast, New England. They kind of treat college hockey the way that we treat college baseball here in some ways.
That is an interesting comparison, because college hockey is, even in the North, where people say that they care about it, it's still such an easy sport. I mean, you really don't see a lot, especially in the Big Ten, unless you're in a place like Penn State is a more recent example, just with the revised program that they've had. But it's weird though how you really don't see a ton of fanfare, with the exception of those very specific places. And I think, baseball from a spectator standpoint, like Major League Baseball is dealing with this issue with attendance, with being able to kind of keep the attention span of today's generation. It's just different. Maybe that's got something to do with it.
Yeah. Connor O'Gara joining us here on Halftime. Connor, I was reading some of your columns that you had on Saturday Down South, and some of the news we didn't get to really, you were off Monday, and then I remember when the news of Coach K retiring from Duke broke late last week, and I really enjoyed your column that you wrote comparing Mike Krzyzewski's retirement to when Nick Saban could possibly hang it up. Do you think we'll get the same? And the fanfare will definitely be there because he'd go down as the greatest college coach ever in college football. But do you think we'll get like the year-long celebration that Coach K is more than likely fixing to get this upcoming college basketball season when Nick Saban decides to hang it up?
I think those chances are second to none. Can you picture Nick Saban, of all people, trying to get all this additional praise for a full year? He would get sick of that after a day. He would hate that. He is the type of person who does not want to be praised. He's not the type of person who's going to go around accepting gifts. He'd rather be on the phone recruiting or something like that than dealing with all that stuff. Whereas Coach K is going to tell you about the right way to play basketball. It's all about the Duke way and all that stuff. I don't see Nick Saban following this path. I see Nick Saban, hopefully, his goal would be to turn the program over to a potential assistant, but the thing is like you look back at these assistants, and yes, he's had some really good ones, but how many of them would he really been confident to turn it over to the same way that Mike Krzyzewski's doing with John Shire? Shout out to the northwest suburbs of Chicago. There's no way that Saban would have turned the program over to a McElwain or a Kiffin. He would have turned it over to Sarkisian. I believe that. That's something that, had that played out and Sarkisian not gotten the Texas job, that's a different story. But then you kind of realize we're talking about timing here. And if you're Alabama, you know that that's such a massive opening to have to fill, and it's different in college basketball than it is for college football because you can't have that full year without knowing who that replacement is going to be because of recruiting and what it means. So I don't see Alabama necessarily doing that unless the exact situation lines up. But then that would also mean not being able to be like, hey, Dabo Swinney, you want to do this thing? Do you want to make this thing work? So I just don't think it would happen. I think what's happening at Duke is just a much different set of circumstances, but I know people were asking that question when Coach K stepped down.
Trying to dream up, like in my head, Connor, like what it'll look like when Coach K coaches his final game in the Dean Dome, which I know essentially is kind of almost like Durham anyway. I know it's a different town, but it's 15 minutes away. Even the Celtics gave Kareem Abdul-Jabbar a rocking chair when he had his whole go-away tour. Boston fans said goodbye and nice things about Derek Jeter. I'm assuming North Carolina fans may have to do the same thing about Coach K. But I want you, in your mind right now, to picture what it would look like if Nick Saban had some sort of going-away tour for a final year and he's coaching his last Iron Bowl in Auburn. What are they going to do for him as a go-away president?
Great question.
They would probably, let's see, I think you probably have to give him a large tree. I think you give him a very, very large tree and say, hey, you know what? Yep. I think, yeah, something like that. Put it on the desk. Just a little nod, and it doesn't necessarily have to be some big public thing. I wouldn't mind if all of these things happened behind closed doors and we just one day saw like one of these interviews with Coach K, and we see all the different little trinkets that he's acquired from these different places instead of it being like something that they have to, take a bunch of pictures of and, put it on social media. I don't really care about all that stuff. Just let me see and let me kind of guess for myself what he got from each individual place. If Saban were to ever do anything like that, I think you would probably tend to go that route.
Like a lifetime supply of powdered Toomer's Corner lemonade. I think
that would be great.
That's what you give him.
That would be great. Connor, I'm kind of curious to hear your standpoint on this. And we talked about this last week with John Shire taking over at Duke once Mike Krzyzewski's time is up as the coach in waiting. And whenever Nick Saban does decide to hang it up, is that the route you think Alabama could go? Or I could see where Duke, and maybe this isn't a fair question to ask because there is such a vast difference between college basketball, college coaching searches, and college football. But do you think Alabama could go that route and maybe try to keep the continuity and the kind of the culture that Saban puts in there to try to make the transition not as daunting as it would be to bring in a whole new regime and coaching staff with a coach in waiting?
In a perfect world, yes, they would. But think about it. Who's the only coach on that staff right now who would legitimately have a chance to do that? This isn't going to be a popular answer because of the way that things played out for him in Houston, but Bill O'Brien's the only guy who kind of fits that bill on current staff. You're not necessarily going to turn it over to Pete Golding. Alabama fans would set the state on fire if that happened. And you look down the line, you're like, wait a minute, Pete Golding is the only remaining staff member from that 2018 team at Alabama. There's so much staff turnover that happened because of the way Alabama's perceived in the coaching world. So you have to have the exact perfect timing. And even with a case like Sarkisian, who I would argue is the best assistant in the history of Alabama football, and what he did in those 2 years is just going to be incredibly difficult for anyone to live up to. He still ended up getting the Texas job right afterwards. You still need that timing to line up perfectly. So I think ideally Alabama would like to go that route. In actuality, I don't think they will, and I think this ends up probably opening up to a national search.
Right on cue is us talking about Nick Saban retirement. This news just broke that Nick Saban has signed a contract extension with Alabama through February 2029 for a base salary of a very meager $8.425 million a year.
So let's continue with the retirement fantasies.
$8.25 million. That's not terrible for a guy who's, won a few rings here and there and, had some success in this league. It's decent. It's good money if you get it. But yeah. I'm surprised they don't just do the Kentucky thing and just say, hey, we're going to just do the lifetime contract thing so we don't have to address that at any point, because Saban's stepping down on his own terms no matter what. I mean, at this point, that's pretty much a foregone conclusion unless you were to fire him with cause. Some sort of, I'm not going to say this is going to happen, but if a Joe Paterno-like scandal were to unfold, heaven forbid, then you would tend to think that you'd be able to fire him with cause in any other scenario. So, yeah, just give him a lifetime contract at this point. Don't necessarily mess around with the numbers. We don't care if it goes to 2027 or 2047. Saban's coaching until the robots take over anyway, so this is probably all you do.
That's right. And then, I think Saban and Belichick should retire on the same year. They should go on a vacation together, a couple of bros, going fishing, and that's the way that they celebrate their career, because nobody else wants to celebrate. The only celebration they're going to be doing when those two guys retire are celebrations that they're done. You'll hear the party throughout the entire SEC that finally, somebody else might become a more dominant program in this conference, because that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, and, the LeBron James, what was it? It was LeBron, Chris Paul, and Dwayne Wade when they did the banana boat pictures. Uh-huh. So, yeah, I mean, Saban and Belichick, hopefully they can ride off into the sunset together. Hopefully we get that type of content on social media. And not that either of them would be the type of people to put that out there, but hopefully someone can catch them doing such things. And the Internet, I think SaturdayDownSouth.com would melt down if a photo like that ever came across the Internet. I am here for a Nick Saban, Bill Belichick shared TikTok account, man. I think that's great stuff.
Either that or let's just get them on a tandem bike and go bro biking together.
I'd need a camera for that. Hey, last thing, here's what you give Saban at the last ever Iron Bowl when you know he's retiring. Chris Davis walks out and hands him a giant shoe with the number 6 on it.
Oh,
and it's an Auburn shoe. That's all. It's just maybe an Auburn orange kicking shoe with a 6 on it. That's it, right?
See, Phil, in theory, don't get me wrong. Love that idea. Love trying to troll the GOAT, even though you probably shouldn't do that. If you do that, your team is losing 63-0 that day, and you have nobody to blame but yourself.
I think you're right. Then again, maybe it would happen anyway. Appreciate you, Connor. It's good to talk to you after a couple weeks. Have a great week, man.
Thanks, Connor.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, guys.
That's Connor O'Gara.
We have a great conversation about him retiring, and then he signs a contract extension right in the middle of it.
Would that be the broadcaster jinx finally working on you on SmackDown?
Maybe so. Maybe it finally did happen to me.
Finally took some time. I don't know if you noticed, I gave Bubba a star on the broadcast last night. He's been begging for these things for the last 4 years.
Look at you.
I put a star in my scorebook anytime any player makes a really good play in the field, whether it's a Razorback or the opponent. And Bubba complains I don't give him stars. So I felt like a kindergarten teacher yesterday, man. I went to Office Depot. I bought a pack of 30 gold stars of three different sizes, and I'm going to give him the Bubba whenever he does something good. It's like we have a behavior chart in the radio booth now.
That's fantastic.
877-377-6963. Behave yourself. We're right back.